It's a mixed farm. We all as a team forget that. We always say, oh, we're an arable farm in Leicestershire. We're actually a mixed farm. So the way the farm works, we have a joint venture partnership with the Wrights, who farm that way next door to us. And with that joint venture, we farm about 1,000 hectares. That's tagged onto our 330. We then have an informal partnership with the Owens, who farm just up here. They run a very intensive but very good lamb and sheep production business, and that's an integral part of integrating things together. Jeremy, I didn't really know Jeremy that well before, but he's been here about 3 times in the last 2 weeks or 3 weeks, and I actually really get what he does, and we do it in a slightly different way. So our partnership joint venture that way, they have a South Devon beef supplement. So we are slap bang in the middle of a mixed farming area. On the farm, in terms of research, we've been here for 27 years, and the project has been doing research all that time, but it's applied, practical, and on a field scale, most of it. We've done things like, in the last, well, over 25 years, we've doubled songbird numbers twice. We doubled them, took the measures away, the population crashed again. We put the measures back in place, the population doubled again. It's quite interesting, last year the numbers went down by 20%. That's going to be quite interesting working out why, but that was probably weather related. Really cold until late April, early May. Click of your fingers, bone dry, and you can still see the cracks in here from last year. So there's all sorts of reasons. As well as the wildlife research, we also do, and have done for a while, an awful lot of research into soil and how soil works and how soil functions. So one project you won't see today is one that we're doing with Syngenta. It's our biggest project at the minute, where we've got 6 fields around the farm, taking the rotation right the way round, and each field is split into 3. So there's a minimum till strip, a direct drill strip, and a plough strip. We're working out what happens. Really interested, even after 1 year. And we're going to the depths of finding out about carbon emissions and all that sort of stuff. So really interesting work. That's a little bit of background. Where's Stuart? Where's he gone? Agroforestry in here. This is a joint project with the Woodland Trust and with the Organic Research Centre. And basically what we've done across this field, it's a permanent grass field, and we're looking at planting different tree densities to work out what happens. And I'll let Stuart explain how that works while I get a bit of soil.
Yeah. Morning all. It's always nice and windy up here.
It's always a good place to stop.
So a few years ago we decided that we were going to do some form of agroforestry with the Allerton Trust, and this field came up, and so we started to look at what we could do and how we could work through. One of the big sticking points at the time was the basic farm payment, and as Stephen was saying earlier, that's changed over the last few years, but in 2015 there was a slight change that allowed us to do this, which sort of looked at the fact that as long as the trees had some agricultural activity taking place beneath them, then you could still claim that area as eligible for basic farm payment. So the field you're on has been planted for the last 3 years and is still being claimed as grassland and in the basic farm payment, most of it. One of the things we really wanted to address was how silver pasture fitted into farms and how we could make that work a little bit better, and also getting the viability right. So it did seem a little bit daft to be planting trees all over the place and actually then trying to graze beneath them if there's nothing to graze. So we looked at the field, we divided it up. We've now got 14 different plots of 7 different densities, ranging from 1,600 trees per hectare, which is a very standard density for forestry, down to 100 trees per hectare, which was that sort of magic number that was always getting a bit stuck within the basic farm payment, and everything in between. Now we really thought that the 1, 2 and 400 trees per hectare were going to be the most beneficial for agroforestry, so they're the ones that we put in to the research project. We then kept the 600 and 800 trees per hectare and 1,000 trees per hectare really predominantly there to do thinnings with in the future, and to take the wood chip away and use that in the boiler, a wood chip boiler in the visitor centre that you just come from. And the 1,600 and to a degree some of the 1,000 trees per hectare was there to add some value to this area from the pheasant shoot point of view. So we looked at this with a whole farm, but we didn't want to lose the basis of what we were doing. The trees are all native trees, all supplied by the Woodland Trust, and we planted them with a view that we could try and get in and do the maintenance. So whilst they all look a little bit scruffy and a bit everywhere, a bit sort of randomly planted, they're all planted in 2.5 metre rows, and all planted at various densities within that. So if you walk through, you will find that all the rows are either 2.5, 5, 7.5 or 10 metre rows, and that gives us the ability to get through and do some of the maintenance work. Main issues that we've come up with so far is you'll see that we have got plenty of trees growing. In fact, I know that pretty much every single tree is growing, because Jim and Alistair and myself and a few other people from the Allerton Trust came out and replanted everything. There was only about 120 trees that had died, so we're all living. But a lot of them are not growing above the shelters at the moment, and that is predominantly down to the fact that the shelters that we chose are perhaps not the most adequate ones, and also that we had a very dry year last year, as you all know, and so the sheep that were in here ate all the grass, couldn't find anything else to eat, so went up and started eating all the trees at the top. And one of the things that we may well be looking at going forwards is reducing that pressure at certain times of the year, so we can get the trees to graze to grow away from that. Some of the benefits we wanted to get out of this trial effectively were looking at why and how the benefits of trees will fit in. So we wanted to look at the shelter and shade at both ends of the year on that. We know anecdotally that in hot weather the sheep will go and get under a hedge, under a tree, and so we wanted to put that into practice and see whether that works here. We also wanted to make sure that at the other end of the year, the rain, the cold, you can keep the sheep out for a little bit longer, and we know that works in certain areas. So there's projects like Pontbren up in Wales where we've seen that working, we've seen that in action. I guess some of the things that we also wanted to do, and the reason that we've got it with the Allerton Trust here, is the research side of things. And so we were very, very lucky to start putting in quite a large proportion of different research into this area. Infiltration rates, we're looking at different growth rates and different growth rates of both the trees and also the grass and the vegetation. We'd like to start looking into live weight gain and trying to work out exactly how much live weight gain there is on here when the sheep come in and off again. We did an awful lot of work on earthworm and soil condition and soil structure, which Jim will have to show you about in a minute. And the list sort of keeps going onwards. One of the things that we found quite useful to start off with, and this is why you do pilots, is that the shelters that we've used aren't adequate. We found that out. So there were two things that have flagged up from this. One is that the shelters aren't high enough, so the sheep can get onto them. The second of which is, and we worked this one out quite early on, is that one stake is just not enough to hold up the trees when you're grazing throughout the area. So we've used two stakes on all of these tubes to hold them up a little bit. And some of the things we were considering putting in are rubbing posts at certain times, which we may well put in at a later date. I've no doubt missed stuff, but shout up if you've got any questions or anything you'd like to go over, or if you've got any comments. I'm very happy to take them on board. I missed anything?
Have you got any data, Stuart, on infiltration rates? Because when Carlisle flooded a few years back, the government announced they were going to plant the Lake District up, and that was going to solve the problem. But I don't know where they got that from.
Yes, again, it's sort of semi-anecdotal, really. That a lot of the areas that we're planting on the uplands of Cumbria in specific, and the dingles and the valleys, we're getting huge amounts of infiltration into those areas. We've done quite a lot of work on riparian sites throughout Shropshire as well, where we get a lot more bank stability from planting. And if you can get even quite small areas of rough vegetation, doesn't have to be trees, but rough vegetation, you get a huge amount of infiltration come through. So on lighter lands, for instance, if you're growing on potato land or anything like that, you can get a little strip around the outside. You'll find that you capture an awful lot of the silt and you infiltrate a lot of the water before it gets into the watercourse. So yes, and obviously from your point of view here, we've got the infiltration happening at certain points in and around this field.
Stuart, the one that's been researched, which most people are aware of, is the that particular catchment, the Pombrone catchment, it slowed the flow by about 40%. It's a small catchment and it reduced that peak flow by about 40%.
Pombrone, for anyone who's not aware of it, it was a little cooperative of farmers that decided they wanted to start planting trees to help alleviate their lambing issues predominantly, and they ended up planting only a very small amount. It's about 4 or 5% of the farm, 5% of the farm, wasn't it? And it's had a massive effect on the flow rate on the stream. So as Alan said.
With regards to shelters, you've been doing some work at David Rose's. Have we found something that works?
Yeah, so it's a real learning curve, because when you start looking at these agroforestry schemes and grazing specifically, and trying to retain that basic farm payment, it's a real sort of cost. You're looking at the cost and how much it's going to take to plant these schemes. It's very easy to say, well, actually Parkland guards or big wire guards will be brilliant, but of course they're 15 to 20 pounds per shelter. So what we've had to do is try and sort of work that one through. And one of the other sites that we're working with is a chap called David Rose up near Newark, who's doing a similar sort of scheme, in that it is trees growing with livestock underneath, predominantly sheep, but he's also got some geese there as well. And what we found is that has a really different effect on the different shelters that we're using. So we are trialling lots of different ones. Dartington, actually, Harriet said she's looking to do a trial specifically on some of the guards for us. I think 1.2s, had I known what I know 5 years ago, I wouldn't use these 1.2 guards at all for this. I'd go for a slightly bigger guard. I'd probably look, depending on the site, at a mesh guard as well, which would enable a little bit of browsing on the outside, but would, if we went for 1.5s, would let the trees get out the top a little bit and grow through. I'd sort of say here it's less of an issue if we can keep the grazing pressure down going forwards for maybe a year or two and let the trees get away. I think that will be okay. For timber production, you really want the leader to get away quite quickly, but this is not the reason for doing this. This is here for an agroforestry trial and for silvipastoral, so it's not necessarily the end game. What we want with David's, because it's predominantly fruit production, is to get those trees into good order and get them growing, and so that's meant we've had to be quite proactive in changing a lot of the shelters there to get that to stop that tree from being destroyed or at least taken down by the sheep on site. I should also add that one of the things we took a stance on at the very start of this with maintenance is that if you want to get good growth rates through trees, you would plant at quite high density rates, and you would also do a lot of maintenance in specific spraying or mulching around the base of the tree, and that helps to retain moisture and nutrients for the tree, so the tree will grow a lot quicker. Part of one of the reasons why the trees are growing a little bit slower here is that we haven't done that, because this is a field that we wanted to be grass and to be grazed, and is a grazing project, not a forestry project. So we haven't specifically sprayed around the base of any of these trees with a view that if we'd done that, we'd be opening that area up to weed growth for docks and nettles and thistles, etc. And we didn't want that to be part of it. So we always knew there was going to be a little bit of a lesser growth rate. And then just incidentally, the areas that you can see around you that are fenced off have the majority of the shrubs in them, and so they were there as sacrificial areas. So they will be taken out of basic farm payment, although I think this is the last year they are being grazed round, almost mob grazed round, quite sort of short period of time where the sheep are put in and grazed round the bottom. But they will eventually be left as fenced areas that don't have any grazing in them.
Okay, so just